All right. So I woke up on Twitter today and I saw a bunch of people reacting to what sounded like in the wording of their tweets to be like, oh, Baker Mayfield finally got traded. But that's not what happened. Now, if you've been watching me for any amount of time over the last few months, you would know that, I don't think that a trade is likely to happen for Baker Mayfield for a number of reasons that don't really factor in, well, that do factor in a lot of other things, but, for a number of reasons that kind of outweigh the fact that he should be a decent trade asset based on the fact that he's not a terrible quarterback, right? He's a pretty good, sometimes okay, sometimes below average quarterback, which a lot of teams used to pay an arm and a leg for just a few years ago. But given that he's not been traded, given that it's June 14th and he's not been traded, given the fact that the Panthers are seemingly the only team interested and they have more quarterbacks than the Cleveland Browns do on their roster right now, makes me feel like all of this is unlikely. But the rumors did pop up again. I'll read the report. This comes from Bleacher Report, Mike Sherrari, who is sourcing Jonathan Jones and other reporters in this. So this is more than one report, but it's out there again. Now, the report comes from Bleacher Report. I'll read it here, put it on screen for you guys. The Carolina Panthers are reportedly making a push to acquire disgruntled quarterback Baker Mayfield from the Cleveland Browns, according to Jonathan Jones of CBS Sports. The Panthers and the Browns are holding trade talks focusing on Baker Mayfield, with the main sticking point being how much of the salary are the Browns willing to absorb. Jones added that Cleveland has made its best offer yet. Carolina has made Cleveland its best offer yet for Mayfield. Be interested to know what that is. And there is a sense of urgency on the Panthers side to get a deal done in order to have Baker Mayfield in the fold as part of minicamp. The Browns have essentially turned the page on Mayfield in March, given Deshaun Watson, and just goes into the history of Baker Mayfield and why Baker Mayfield's not going to play for the Browns, despite people always throwing it out there as a take that Baker could play if Deshaun's suspended for a year. Completely unrealistic. The Browns have no plans of having Baker Mayfield on the team. And even if Deshaun gets suspended for 2 years, they will sit that out gladly instead of going back to Baker Mayfield. That is the stance that they have made once they have traded for Watson, whether you like it or not. That is what's going on with that whole situation. And that probably comes from Jimmy Haslam on down, because he had to sign the contract, the check on that contract to make that happen. So this is a long-term thing with Watson. I mean, Watson said in his press conference later on today that, he plans on retiring a Cleveland Brown. This is a long-term thing. Deshaun Watson in Cleveland, that's going to be here for a while. It's going to be something we're going to have to talk about for a while here. So the idea that we're just going to switch back to Baker Mayfield and dump Deshaun Watson, that's just, I've heard that take out there. It's a ridiculous one. And honestly, it's not even beneficial to Baker Mayfield at that point. But let's go back to the report. And on one hand, this report is pretty much what we've been hearing, right? It's the same stuff with Baker Mayfield. It's the same thing. It's coming down to salary. Nobody wants to pay it. But the one difference, well, there's a couple of key differences here. Carolina wants to have Baker Mayfield in for minicamp. That's important. The other difference is that they're upping the offer, right? Now, the Browns' leverage is not traditional leverage here, because from everything that you have heard, now maybe behind the scenes, there's more to take in. But it doesn't seem like the trade market for Baker Mayfield is huge. So if you're Carolina, the leverage the Browns have for trading you Baker Mayfield, despite the fact that we all know that if this went all the way to September, Baker Mayfield's going to get cut, right? Like, he's not going to make the final 53-man roster. The Browns will not play that out till that point, right? Because they're already at a roster jam with 5 running backs. They have an incredibly deep roster. They're not going to save a roster spot for a guy who's not going to play and put him on the 53. Remember, you can be on the 53-man roster and not be active. So even if he's inactive, he does count as the 53-man roster. There's like 48 that are active on game day. There's 53 that can be on the roster, plus practice squad, and you have to release somebody to put them on the practice squad. So in order for the Browns to hold this leverage out during the season, it would require them to sacrifice a roster spot, which I don't think they would be willing to do. Not a lot of teams would be willing to do that in this situation unless they felt like the compensation could be like a first or second round pick, potentially. I think we're past the point of expecting that for Baker Mayfield. Now, the reason the Browns have leverage with Carolina is Carolina wants to get him in early. If you want to get Baker Mayfield in early, you have to trade for him, right? If you want to wait till September and roll the dice on Baker Mayfield, you can get him without trading for him. But you're not going to get him in your offseason program, which means that you're not going to be able to have him ready for week 1, which means that you're probably going to spend 6 weeks getting him up to speed during the season in order for him to play. So you can wait because the Browns will cut him eventually, right? You can wait until September for the Browns to cut Baker Mayfield. That's probably when they would do it, right? When they have to go to 53, they would cut Baker Mayfield. They might even do it when they have to cut down to 75. Who knows? But I think it's all one cut now, right? So since it's all one cut now, it will happen at that cut down date. And that is the leverage. If you want Baker Mayfield to start for you week 1, you have to trade for him. That is the leverage that the Cleveland Browns have. You can get him in September, but he ain't going to be able to play for how long? Right? You want to get him in the building. You want to get him in your thing. That's where the Browns' leverage is. Now, that's a significantly weaker leverage than what most teams work with when it comes to leverage, which is you just won't get the player because somebody else will get him and somebody else wants to trade for him if you don't make this trade, which will net you more draft picks. But this leverage is worth something, right? And that is the leverage point that I don't think a lot of people have pointed out or talked about enough, is that for the Carolina Panthers or any team interested in starting Baker Mayfield this year. Now, if you want him to sit the pine, let's say you're Tampa Bay and you're interested in Baker Mayfield to be the backup for a couple of years behind Tom Brady, let him get released, sign him on a cheap 2-year deal. It ain't like you're worried about getting him on the field day 1 anyways. You can make that plan. That's why the teams that are interested in Baker Mayfield to be a backup are ultimately not going to be teams that are going to trade for him because they don't care when they get Baker Mayfield in the building. But if you want Baker Mayfield to start for you week 1 potentially, you have to make the trade now because it's the only way you get him in your building for training camp, right? If the Browns are willing to hold this thing out till its logical conclusion, which is September. Now, they could go further than September. It does not make sense for the Cleveland Browns to go past September with this whole thing because, again, keeping Baker Mayfield in a roster spot hostage just to seek out some trade value maybe would be ridiculous because what if you don't get the trade value you want? You end up releasing him before the trade deadline like you did Odell Beckham, and then you not only wasted a roster spot for 8 weeks, but you just wasted everybody's time with this whole situation. That would just be a very bad look for the Cleveland Browns organization if they did that. So I think they're aware of that. This ain't going to go past September, but the leverage isn't if the Browns cut him or not. That's what I think even I have not thought about fully when I talked about this in the past is I thought about it as either they cut him or they don't. But that's not the leverage. The leverage is when do you cut Baker Mayfield and when does a team want to have him in the building? So I don't know if a trade happens now, right? I think we've been here before with the noise between Carolina and Cleveland. With Carolina, it's interesting that they're even interested in doing this because they still have Sam Darnold. They still have Phillip Walker. They still have Matt Corral. By the way, if you're Matt Corral or a Matt Corral fan in Carolina, this is not a good look for what they feel about Matt Corral if they're already looking to bring in Baker Mayfield. Carolina Panthers also, let's factor this in. They're not a well-run organization. And I know people act like the Browns aren't a well-run organization. Football-wise, they're a pretty well-run organization as of the last 2 years. You can't really debate that with football moves. If you want to make some kind of take because they traded for Deshaun Watson, which most other NFL teams, if the opportunity was approached to him, would have done. I mean, there was a literal sweepstakes for this guy after the grand jury hearings. If you want to say that makes the Browns a terrible organization, Sure, but you also have to say that every other organization involved is a god-awful organization. If that's how you're going to go with it, cool, whatever. I'm not going to argue with you about that, but the Browns are a pretty well-run football organization. So they're not going to be unsound about this. They have proven to be sound about this, right? They're not going to do something ridiculous like keep them on the roster and sacrifice a roster spot just to hold leverage that they don't have, or be petty towards Baker Mayfield. That would be what a bad organization would do. But they're also going to try to play out whatever leverage they have, or manufacture some leverage if they can't play out any leverage. And this is them manufacturing some leverage, which is working on the Carolina Panthers as it's been reported. Now, again, I don't know if this makes sense for the Carolina Panthers to do, logically speaking, because, again, you just traded a third-round pick plus spent a third-round pick on Matt Corral. You have Sam Darnold there, who's not good. You have Philip Walker, who was okay. And you have a lot of money already tied up and a lot of assets tied up into that room. And honestly, like, how do you, if you're trying to work on Sam Darnold, which I would assume that what are you going to do, release Sam Darnold? I don't know what you do with Sam Darnold in this situation. And I only say I don't know what you do with Sam Darnold, not because Sam Darnold's a good enough player to warrant this, but just because he has a lot of money owed to him too. I believe they took up that fifth-year option for Sam Darnold. So what do you do with that money, right, if you bring in Baker? Now, again, part of this is the Browns will have to eat a significant amount of the salary cap for Baker Mayfield. So how does Carolina make that worthwhile? You've already traded a third-round pick for Matt Corral. Are you going to give up another third-round pick to bring in Baker Mayfield? This seems directionally confused from the Carolina Panthers organization. I'm going to be real with you. If you're a Panthers fan watching this video, this seems like moves that the Browns used to make, like in 2012, or not 2012. Yeah, 2012 to like 2017, where it just didn't make any damn sense what they were trying to do in one direction or the other. So you're not in a good place if you're the Carolina Panthers. I hate to say this to you, but I'm saying this with experience that, like, you know, I have seen bad front offices in action before, and this looks like a bad front office. But that being said, if the Carolina Panthers are suckers, maybe you get a lot for Baker Mayfield. I don't know. I think it's unrealistic to think you're going to get more than a fifth, but, you know, all the GMs in the NFL aren't good at this, so maybe they don't. Maybe they get something better than that. But that's the dilemma, right? If you're Carolina, you want them in before June, so you have to trade for them. What are you willing to give up, and at what salary cap point does it even make sense to do this? Because Sam Darnold's going to be expensive. Baker Mayfield, if you just eat you're not eating the whole 18 without penalty. So, you know, you're probably, let's say Baker Mayfield at $5 million, right? So 18 plus 5, now you're paying effectively $23 million, whatever you're paying Matt Corral. Okay, cool. Are you going to keep 3 quarterbacks on the roster and just cut Philip Walker? Which probably what you do, but 3 quarterbacks on the roster is one thing. 3 quarterbacks on the roster when ain't none of them like franchise guys, that's a mess. That's a mess, but you can't cut Matt Corral. At this point, it would be silly to cut Sam Darnold because, I mean, he might as well back up somebody, right? If he's going to get paid and he's willing to play. This isn't a Baker Mayfield situation where Baker's not going to play for the Browns no more. I mean, then you will have Baker Mayfield there. Again, I get why Carolina wants to do this because Baker Mayfield's their best shot at being a decent team this year. I would say they'll be around 500 if Baker starts for them, maybe even a game or two over 500. But it just don't make sense in the long term for them to do this. But we'll see what they do. We'll see what they're willing to give up because, again, if the Browns are willing to take that salary, let's say get it down to 15. Let's say they eat $12 million of it, which they can, right? They eat $12 million of that Baker Mayfield salary. They effectively save $6 million. Cool. And the Carolina Panthers eat the rest of that. The Browns are going to want a significant draft portion for that, right? So now the trade isn't just for Baker Mayfield. It's for Baker Mayfield and $12 million. So they're going to want a pick for that $12 million portion of that as well as a pick for Baker Mayfield. So the compensation is going to have to be sweet for that because, again, it's not just a trade for Baker Mayfield. It's a trade for Baker Mayfield and the cap relief that you should be assuming for Baker Mayfield, but that we're eating. So it's $12 million, and Baker Mayfield, what are you sending me? You see how that changes the math on what the compensation should be and why the Browns aren't just going to settle for like a 6th-round pick for Baker Mayfield because that would effectively just be worthless to them. But that's my thoughts on this whole trade rumor thing. Let's see if a trade gets done, right? I think we all want this situation to be over with. We have enough storylines going on in the Cleveland Browns quarterback room for one team that this storyline getting wrapped up and nipped in the bud would be great, right? Just because it's one less thing for this team, this locker room to worry about. Because let's be honest, this is going to be a team that's going to have a lot of negative attention on it throughout the year, no matter what they do, based just on the scrutiny that they're under for everything that happened in the offseason, right? There are people mad at them for giving up on Baker Mayfield. There are people mad at them for trading for Deshaun Watson. There are people mad individually at those two things. There are people mad at the combination of those two things. So there's going to be a lot of scrutiny on this team. To be able to get one of these things just out the way as soon as you can would be optimal, because this kind of attention does bring negative pressure to the locker room, and you want this team to be incubated in the most optimal situation to be as successful as they can be this year. This going on for the entire length of the season would not be an optimal way to do it. But yeah, that's what I think of it. I ultimately, like, if you ask me, I feel like it's more likely that he gets traded than I thought last week, but I'm still not sold that he's going to get traded. Like, I'm still not sold that that's imminent. Like a lot of people feel like it's imminent. Who knows? I'll hit upload and the trade is going to be official and I'm going to look like an idiot or whatever it is. But that's just my opinion on it. I don't think he gets traded. At least I don't think he gets traded until late July. I think late July is when you're going to see a trade probably pop through for Baker Mayfield. But if he does not get traded in late July or early August, then I do think he does get cut. So we'll see how this plays out. It's going to be an interesting offseason as we get to camp. Also going to be exciting. A lot of players to talk about once we get to see them in pads and stuff. But this is just this whole saga. Hopefully it's coming to an end soon. A lot of smoke out there today that would signal that maybe the Panthers are going to be the team, even after drafting Matt Corral, to take Baker Mayfield off the Cleveland Browns' hands. Interesting way of doing business for Carolina, but hey, I'm not I'm not a Carolina Panther fan. I'm not concerned about their best interest. I am concerned about what the Browns need to do to get rid of this contract. So that is my thoughts. Let me know what y'all think in the comment section below. Y'all have a great day. Have a good night.